morning to everyone in the UK, good afternoon or evening from Australia and everywhere else in the world that you are. We're really, really grateful and pleased that you could join us today. We're very lucky to have Sister Debra here with us to run the session from Australia today. Really excited about this one. Sister Debra is a board member and trustee of St Mary's House of Welcome, so a charity in Australia which assists the disadvantaged and people experiencing chronic homelessness in Melbourne. The charity was opened by Daughters of Charity in 1960, I believe. So Sister Debra, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Rihanna. Lovely to see you all. And for some of the Australians may know some of this, but here we go. So I've entitled it Love is Inventive to Infinity. It's not the exact quote from Vincent, because I think that COVID challenged St Mary's House of Welcome and many other services to be extraordinarily creative and to do that quickly. So St Mary's House of Welcome is situated in Fitzroy, where I am currently located, and that's an inner city suburb of Melbourne in Victoria. And Melbourne was the most locked down city in the world, and that had clear implications when you're trying to run a service. And the rules of lockdown just changed all the time. So a huge challenge. So in March 2020, just after I got back from Great Britain, they started to bring in all the lockdown moves for Victoria. And the board of directors, we met very hurriedly and we made a decision. We'd made two decisions, that whatever was happening, that we would try and feed and support as many disadvantaged homeless people as possible. And secondly, that we would keep as many of our staff as we could employed. We couldn't have volunteers because they were the rules of lockdown. So we were also very conscious that most of the homelessness services at that point in March completely shut. And even all the big ones, you know, and St Mary's is one of the smaller services supporting the homeless, but the big ones all shut. Salvation Army shut, Sacred Heart Mission shut. So we knew that the need was going to be great. The government placed thousands of homeless people in a temporary hotel accommodation, and that sounded really great. Unfortunately, the accommodation didn't have cooking facilities, and for some of them, even if they had cooking facilities, it would have been difficult for them. The government didn't really put any support services in for these people out in these hotels, and there wasn't a real a sensitivity to some of the social issues and physical issues. Now, look, in some ways, I really can't blame the government because, gosh, they had to move so quickly. It was, you know, it was sudden and dramatic, and our lockdowns were extreme. Many people actually left those services. You know, there were drugs, alcohol, violence. They weren't allowed to take their dogs. And for many homeless people, their dog is their family and a point of safety. So these hotels were all over Melbourne in areas that we wouldn't normally support. So 20 kilometres from St Mary's House of Welcome. And we immediately responded to a need. There was also a need to support international students who had no income because everything had shut. So we also supported 25 international students from the Australian Catholic University, and that university is just up the road. I'd love to say this is a story about the past. Rihanna, can you bring up the slides? Sorry.
Yes,
certainly. Yeah. Because it isn't really over for us in Victoria. So just moving on. to the next slide. Thank you. So it's only in the last week that St Mary's House of Welcome have been able to open the dining room for lunch. And we've been doing a hot breakfast for a little while for rough sleepers, and we've been able to provide some support. But we've just opened for lunch and we've just started groups. And the staff are all still in masks. So, and I know even in the last week, 2 staff have come down with COVID. So, you know, staffing is really fragile. So this isn't just a story about the past. It is still a current reality. Thanks, Rihanna. So how did we provide creative and compassionate care in this context? So like Louise and Vincent, we had to develop, and very quickly, a whole new model of service because we couldn't do what we normally do. And it had to happen immediately. We didn't let the people go without a meal for a single day. And it had to be a totally new model of service. So every room in the complex was repurposed for something else. So, you know, the billiard room, it got moved over and it became a place where people were packing meals. So takeaway meals, either from the centre, as you can see a photo there with Brian, one of the workers, with one of our clients, or delivered to hotels. And as I said, as far, quite a distance away. And from March 2020 to June 2021, St Mary's House of Welcome delivered 158,000 meals. That's about 700 to 1,000 meals a day. And normally St Mary's would probably serve, you know, 100 to 150 meals a day. So we really scaled up. And we provided not only the basic meals, but also some packages for people who could do a little bit of cooking. So it was really focused on what do the people need, that compassionate response and a creative response. Thank you. Rihanna, poor thing, she's doing 2 things at once here. So when you read the writings of Vincent and Louise, when there was a new project starting, Vincent always had this clear pathway for decision-making and discernment. It was about assessing the need by listening to the poor. It was about being creative. How could this need be met? Who could assist? Was it going to be the daughters? Was it going to be the ladies of charity? Who could assist? How are we going to fund it? And then reflecting and reassessing again. And that cycle of decision-making and discernment was repeated over and over again. And that's exactly what St Mary's did. I really hate this word pivot, but it became the catchphrase. So COVID taught us to pivot, to change on the drop of a hat. So at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the government would change all the rules. At 3 o'clock, how they were delivering the service would have to change again. It was about being flexible. It was about responding to those changing needs, the needs of the people, coming out of the accommodation and having nowhere to go. How can we get food out to them? The rules of lockdown just kept changing. We came out of lockdown once and we went back into it. 5-day lockdowns turned out to be 3 months. The whole city had shut down. There was no employment. So there were new homeless people, new people struggling to get a meal. So, and I guess I think about, you know, daughters, availability, flexibility and mobility. This is truly what St Mary's was doing, because we were trying to be available to the people. We were being super flexible, but we also, we were mobile. Instead of serving just this inner city part of Melbourne, we were serving a very large geographic area. So that was really important as we kept changing and changing. There's one of our friends there. That's the front of one of the current brochures. Thank you, Rihanna. So how do we maintain their dignity? This model of service recognised that the basic need for people to be fed. That's a basic human need. And so the food provided included a hot meal, a sandwich, often ham and cheese, fruit salad, fruit juice, and a cake, a biscuit, and sometimes another treat. And that's a basic matter of justice. Every human person needs to be able to have a basic meal. But there was choice. So we provided vegan and vegetarian meals. And we got the assistance of a funny little cafe in Melbourne called Lentil as Anything that provide vegan and vegetarian meals. Interesting business model that you just pay what you think the meal's worth. And they were fabulous in providing those meals. Unfortunately, that little restaurant has gone bankrupt, and probably partly due to all of this. There were messages of hope and care included in each parcel because there couldn't be much personal contact. So a whole lot of us were asked if we could write a little note to people. So, we got going with little notes. I couldn't go to St Mary's for much of this because they're only allowed a certain number of people on the premises. And if I went down, it would have taken away from other people. But I think that was just a small act of kindness and compassion for the people receiving this care package. Lockdown broke a whole sense of community, societal community, social community. It limited all personal relationships. So you couldn't have people to your home, you couldn't see your friends, you couldn't go more than 5 kilometres. Only supermarkets and chemists were open. It increased isolation, and mental health issues across society have become quite serious, especially among marginalised. And we're seeing that today at St Mary's. There's a high level of aggression and people who are seriously unwell. Most of us had trouble getting to the doctor. Everything was being done by telehealth. That doesn't quite work when you live under a tree. Getting prescriptions, it was all so difficult, and it was made much, much, much worse for people who are homeless and already on the margins. We were able to provide some support and referrals, mostly by phone or at the front door and through the window. Obviously, the staff in full PPE. But, a lot of the clients of St Mary's, they need someone to accompany them to appointments and things because it's difficult for them. But we tried where we could to give people immediate support and referrals. I think the issue of masks, and as I said, we're still wearing them at St Mary's today, it really limits that simple act of engagement in a smile. For many people who are homeless or on the margins here in Fitzroy, the thing that they'll often share with you is that they feel invisible. People walk past, they don't speak, they don't say hello, they put their head down and move as quickly as possible. And this was made a lot worse when people are all wearing masks. There's no smile. The other thing is that in Melbourne, we largely went to an economy which was cashless. We weren't, people in shops or whatever wouldn't accept cash. So we all moved to just using cards. And so those who beg on the streets, you'd have literally nothing in your purse, and, but at least if you could go and say to the person, look, I'm really sorry, but I don't have any cash. At least that thing of not feeling invisible became very important. I suppose in all this, things like pastoral care didn't happen. it was just a time where the whole little community of St Mary's House of Welcome, there's no pool games, there's no choir, there's no groups, they're not together. Interestingly, a lot of them used to gather across the road. They know that they need community because they don't often have family. So how to maintain their dignity through all of this was, and I'd have to say still is, a challenge. Thanks, Rihanna. So there's a lot of risk in all this. Now, we know that Louise and Vincent took an incredible risk in the establishment of the Daughters, providing care out on the streets in high-risk environments and creating new and innovative service models. Incredible risks. And this whole venture that St Mary's went into, because that's what the people needed, was extraordinarily risky and is still risky. But I guess the board immediately weighed what are the greater risks and just responded for what the people needed, but accepting the risks. And of course, the first risk was COVID. I think pretty well everyone at St Mary's has had COVID, if not once, but more than once. The clients, even though we've had vaccination buses coming to St Mary's regularly, the statistics are that the homelessness population, only about 20% are vaccinated. And they don't have records of vaccination because a lot of them don't have smartphones. They can't access the government website MyGov to have proof of vaccination. A lot of them have other health issues. A lot of them were really fearful of vaccination. And we all know all the stories that were circulating about how dangerous vaccinations were. The whole thing of PPE, the cost of PPE, and the stress of it all. We had a whole lot of staff went off on stress leave. It's not that they're not good people, but it just was so difficult. And being in full PPE in an Australian summer is no fun at all. So how do we access the food? Well, you know, we know that Vincent and Louise were amazing networkers. We know that they trusted in the providence of God. They accessed money and objects from the wealthy, from the broader society. So networking to get the food became a high priority. We did not have a lot of money just to be paying for food. The government decided, bless them, that they would keep the parliamentary kitchen staff employed. So they were providing a substantial amount of food every day. They started a program to support restaurants. Fitzroy is quite a restaurant area. And so we were able to get food from some restaurants. And some restaurants also made decisions that they would keep their staff employed. And as I said, Lentil as anything came up with the vegetarian and vegan food. But, you know, it was a risky thing. What are we going to have tomorrow? You know, we wanted to give the people some variety in what they were eating. So access to food was highly risky. It was a financial nightmare. And St Mary's is still struggling with that issue, with that longer term issue. You know, we all tell the story of the Good Samaritan story. It's a key story in welfare. And, you know, we talk about the Good Samaritan and the victim. And we talk about those who didn't stop. There's another person in that story, and that's the hotel manager. So the Good Samaritan left the injured person with the hotel manager, gave him some money and said, when I come back, I'll pay you what's owing. That hotel manager had no idea if he was really going to get paid. And neither did St Mary's. Sometimes, you know, you just have to trust. You really have to trust. So the cost of all the plastic containers you can see in the picture, the paper bags, the cost of all of that, 158,000 meals with 2 plastic containers and 1 paper bag per meal, plus some other things, cutlery, was huge. One of the aspects was the ethical issue of how much plastic we were using, but we didn't have a choice. That risk of the loss of a sense of community, would St Mary's ever regain its sense of community? It has. In fact, I think stronger than ever. We couldn't provide the supports that people really needed. And we had to do it all without volunteers. We're only just getting volunteers back. And St Mary's has limited paid staff, but usually a lot of volunteers. So there were huge risks in all of this. However, the risks, were they worth it? Absolutely. So I think that St Mary's is providing all of us with a model of flexible, client-focused, creative, imaginative service delivery. It's costly love. Costly at every level to those most marginalised in our society. And Rhianna, just the last photo. So would we do it again? Yes, we would do it again, because that's what the people needed. Because you can see the smile on the face of the lady coming to collect her lunch. And I think, you don't do it for those smiles, but they do help. So that's how St Mary's coped with and is coping with the ongoing challenge of COVID. So that's all I have to offer. But, if people have a question, I could answer it for you, I think.
Thank you so much, Sister Debra. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? Put your hand up virtually if it helps as well. In the meantime, we are all so grateful for that inspiring session. I am completely moved by that, and I'm sure everyone here is too. Particularly touched by how quickly you had to develop the entire model, redevelop it, and making sure no one went without a meal for an entire day. The 158,000 meals that you provided is just amazing, and to still give the people choice of what they're eating as well, with the vegetarian and vegan meals, which is exactly what the Vincentian Values are about, offering choice and dignity to the people that we're serving. Thank you so much again, Sister Debra, for that. It was completely inspiring. We've got
the board didn't meet in person for 2.5 years. I think we've only had 2 meetings in person. So it was all being done on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever other platform. And there were lots and lots of board meetings between board meetings, because sometimes we just had to make a rush decision, because this was a risky venture. And we only completely shut, I think twice, once for a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and once for a bit longer, because we had no staff. They all had COVID. So, the board had to make rapid decisions about, do we go ahead?
Yeah. We've got 2 questions here. So we've got Mark.
Yes, Mark.
Thanks, Jen, and Sister Debra, thank you so much. It's absolutely extraordinary to see the reach of the service through that time and how it's kept going. And I knew Melbourne had been, I knew you'd had a difficult time. I hadn't realised it was the most locked down city, and that's quite a challenge to be shouldering. I suppose in the context of that, I suppose I was just wondering how you kept, for all those who were serving, through that time, how you kept energy levels going, because it's been a very strange time, and it's been a very, for a lot of people, a very exhausting time as well, and how you've kept morale and energy up to keep them healthy, you know, COVID aside, but to keep them in a place where they can continue to give the level of care and openness and support that you'd want to see.
I would say that the people of Melbourne were fabulous, and it was our best fundraising year ever through the first year of COVID. Like, people, you know, just donated money. Like, it was fabulous. And, you know, different shops and things came in. But yes, and that buoyed staff up too, to know that that was happening, you know. And the local member of parliament, you know, he came down, I was there, and packing Christmas lunch. And Christmas lunch was a totally traditional Christmas lunch. We had chicken and ham and roast veggies and gravy and stuffing and plum pudding and custard, and, you know, it was a full thing. So those little moments would just sort of help carry people to the next thing. I would say the current thing is harder. There's a lack of clarity. The issues of clients who are not at all well, and aggression. I think we've had the front door replaced twice in the last couple of months. Yeah, that's in some ways a little harder. There was clarity. When you're locked down, you're locked down. And they were designated workers who could travel more than 5 kilometres. Yeah, it was hard. And they, you know, we couldn't do that pastoral support as for clients or for staff as we wanted. No.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark and Sister Deborah. Sister Ellen has a question.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, I've got a million things running around my head, but one of the things that really, really struck me was the little cafe that helped you and then went out of business.
Yeah, lentil as any. Yeah.
That is so sad. And you kind of implied that part of the reason why they went out of business was because of their generosity to you. And well, it will have contributed. And then we were talking about risk, you know, and I suppose they risked and everything fell. You know, that really struck me. And I was starting then to worry about whether St. Mary's had risked everything to the extent that its recovery is going to be extremely difficult, because now we've got the cost of living crisis as well, which will hit St. Mary's as much as it hits its clients. Kind of a slight worry was creeping in about, you know, are you going to reopen fully? Is it going to have to be limited? Is it going to be there at all? You know, there must be a sense of that same pattern, you know, risking everything, going into crisis, survival or not, must be quite critical at the moment. And when you said it was easier before, I suppose all of us know what it's like to be in a crisis and just providing the essentials, but afterwards it can actually be more difficult. So I don't know whether I have a question, but those are the things that are kind of going around my head.
Yeah. St. Mary's is struggling, to be really honest, you know, and you know, we have a board meeting tomorrow night, and I would be very grateful for your prayers for wisdom and discernment. There may be aspects of the work that we might have to let go, but I would really appreciate for the board and management that we have that prayerful support of the sisters over the next month or so. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's tough.
Thank you, Sister Ellen and Sister Deborah. Dee?
Good morning, Sister Deborah. I'm a lady of charity, and I heard you mention their support in among the many volunteers you have. Could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
We have no structured ladies of charity in Australia, but you know, a lot of the volunteers we've always had are probably, without being in a structured way, very much like the ladies of charity, who you know, who come as volunteers, all those people who donate. St Mary's has to raise 43% of its funding anyhow by fundraising. You know, government funding isn't anywhere near adequate. So we don't have a structured Ladies of Charity, but there's that, I would think the spirit of the Ladies of Charity exists here.
Thank you.
Yes, Maureen.
There's a job for you, Dee.
Yes, yes. In my head, as you're talking, the word sustainability keeps hitting me in all directions. And I have an image, and we all remember Monsieur Vincent, and the place has been flooded with these foundling babies and the children. You know, babies grow, they become children, and all the stuff. And we saw on the film, you know, Vincent is the ladies, he's appealing to them. And they say, no, no, no. And then he puts the baby in front of them on the table. And the next thing we see the ladies taking off their jewelry and so on and so on. So I suppose for me, sustainability is that Vincent, he did everything. He was so creative in every way possible to get the resources he needed to achieve the goals he wanted. And I think, you know, I was saying it yesterday, you know, he did that creativity, he did that flexibility, he did all of that. And then he handed it over to God. He said, you know, I've done everything, we've done everything we can, you know, and it's like that. St Mary's House is actually, it's God's project as well as ours. So there's an element in which, you know, the big Vincentian value of trust in divine providence. We do our utmost, but then God's providence has to be there with us. Yeah.
We had a recent meeting of the board, and I also put to them, you know, Louise at Chartres, you know, asking God to destroy the fledgling company that she'd given her absolute all to, if it's not his will, and his will being defined as partly, you know, is it meeting the needs of the people who really need it? You know, that thing of, yes, we might have to let go of aspects of it, preserve core service, what's core service, all of those questions. However, the last couple of times I've been down, it has been fabulous to see the clients back in, and, you know, they had a week of Women's Day, Women's Health. The corporate group is coming back in to provide lunches. But the fundraising thing, there are costs of living issues, and I'm not sure, like, we really have to get that 43% fundraising. Yeah. And we're about to have state elections, and that could go either way for St Mary's.
Yeah.
We had time for one more question. In Mill Hill, I think, is Sister Franca there?
Hi, Franca. Can't quite
We can't hear.
We can't hear you. Do you want to come closer? Thank you. We still can't hear you, unfortunately.
Still can't hear.
If you could just bring the microphone closer to you.
So it should be all right there. Just speak louder.
Thank you very much, Sister Barbara.
It's
Debra, sorry, Debra. So you have given us a beautiful presentation this morning. And in our work with the UN, occasionally questions have come about how countries responded to the COVID-19 and the recovery out of COVID-19. My question is, did you have an opportunity to key this work into your parliament so that it could become part of the report from Australia? One. The second question is, would you be interested in putting this presentation through the organization of the Daughters of Charity into the UN website? Because sometimes the work of the faith-based organizations sometimes is not noticed.
Thanks, Franca. Our local member here, who unfortunately is retiring, we're not happy about that. He was quite active in facilitating things like us getting meals from the parliamentary kitchens. And that was fabulous. And I'm not sure what his role has been. The second question, I would probably need to check with the trustees and with the board before we're publishing things. So,
okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, like there's been a lot of little grassroots things, and one of the sad things, as I said, Fitzroy's, you know, been a place known for its coffee houses and restaurants, and the number of them who have gone to the wall through all this, and tried to open up when things started to open up, but haven't been able to make it. And it's sort of quite sad. There's still, and you know, the CBD in Melbourne is still, you know, fairly empty, but yeah, it's that has impacts in terms of fundraising. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining, and a massive thank you again to Sister Debra. That was a wonderful session.